My name is Miszewski. I'm founder, CEO of balancecommunity. And today I want to talk about highlines, why we need to thoroughly check them before tying into them, and what sort of things to look for when we are inspecting a highline rig. So first, why do we need to check a highline? What could possibly be wrong with it that could deem it unsafe or unfit to walk? Well, first, there's improper use of gear and gear misuse. Slacklining is a sport where we 100% rely on gear that needs to be rigged in a certain way. And most of the time, we're using many different types of gear and connecting them in a particular way to make a safe line to walk on. Because of this, there's a lot of possibilities for things to be misused or wrong gear to be used. A simple overlook, such as, say, a wrongly sized static rope or a webbing that's too stretchy or doesn't have enough stretch, could potentially lead to a very dangerous or fatal situation. Second, there's a bit of a human element involved with rigging highlines. We, as humans, are far from perfect, and we often make mistakes. Mistakes in slackline rigging, such as a partially closed web lock or an unfinished figure eight, can be very dangerous. The more eyes we have on a rig, the less likely one of these mistakes goes unseen. Finally, slackline rigging changes over time. When the line is set up, things can happen that change the rig, such as weather, rain, wind, or any dynamic event that happens on the line. All of these things can be prevented or mitigated extremely by checking our highlines before we tie into them. So before I dive too far into this talk, I want a bit of a disclaimer. Highlining, as we know it, can be a dangerous activity. At a certain point when we're inspecting a highline, we have to accept the risk that's involved with this current setup before we trust our life to it. And that's important to remember, that we are, in fact, putting our life on this line that we're walking. And so it's important to know what the risks are involved with doing that before we actually go and do it. And our goal here today is to greatly minimize that risk by a thorough and exhaustive check of every component within the highline. So, what does a properly rigged highline look like? A few years ago, I came up with an acronym to describe a highline anchor and what it consists of and what characteristics it may have. That's based off of the alpine climbing acronym Serene SAW. Maybe some of you have heard of that. Today, I'd like to expand on that concept and add some characteristics to this acronym so that we can use it to look at an entire highline rig and figure out which components are meeting the criteria. And this acronym is SNARE HEAT SANE. And it means strong, no abrasion, redundant, equalized, high enough, appropriate tensions, small angles, and no extension. We can use this acronym to look at our highline rig and figure out if it meets all of these criteria. And so each highline has 6 basic components. The bolts or anchors that we're attached to and the associated connectors, anchor rope and or slings, master point connectors, our webbing and or rope anchors like web locks, main line and backup line, and finally our leash and leash connectors. No matter how your highline is set up, it is made from these 6 components. And as an example, I'm going to run through the SNARE HEAT SANE acronym for one of these components. Let's choose the anchor rope and or slings. I'm going to use my cheat sheet for this because there's a lot of stuff to consider here. So starting with strength, let's think about, we're looking at a highline, we have it in front of us, we're about to tie in. Looking at the anchor rope and or slings. If you're using rope, what size is the rope? How strong is it? Is that strength appropriate for the way it's being used? What knots are in this rope? How are the ends tied together? Is this knot done correctly? Is it strong enough knot? Are the tails backed up? Can they be? Are there other knots in this rope what kind of knots are those? How are they tied correctly? Are they dressed well? Are you using slings? What color sling is it? We can tell the strength of the sling by looking at the color. Is it used properly? How strong is it in the current configuration? Are the sling and or ropes old? Do they need to be retired? Are they weathered? Okay, so it passes the strength. How about abrasion? Is each leg of the anchor protected from any abrasion point? Does the anchor flex up and down and touch a rock when someone's on the line? Is it protected in this area? Is the anchor rope sling running over any of the bolts and or sharp edges? Is it protected there? What if you're wrapping a huge boulder, like in this picture here? Is it protected all the way around? Are there sharp edges that maybe the rope or sling is going to contact that maybe could damage it? Is the protection you're using or that the rig is using burly or strong enough to actually protect in the event of abrasion? Moving on to redundancy. Is the anchor rope or sling the only thing holding this Highline in place? Is it sufficiently redundant, such as using a BFK in the left picture? If there are multiple legs in the anchor and only one rope is used and or sling, is each leg individualized? For instance, in the BFK? Or would the whole anchor fail if one leg failed? That is not redundant. If the anchor rope is used as a single unit, such as a sliding X, are each leg individually backed up? Neither of these anchors have that. Moving on to equalized. Is the way the anchor rope or sling is rigged causing one leg to see more load than the others? If using a BFK, big friendly knot, big fucking knot, or some form of master point knot, did the knot load correctly and equalize the legs properly? If the legs of the anchor are of different lengths, are they sharing the load equally? Check the longer lengths to see if they are loaded less, the shorter ones to see if they're loaded more. This is often the case. Appropriate tensions. In the current tension that the line is set at, is it higher than the working load limit of the anchor rope or slings that you are using? Taking into account the angles within the anchor, which we'll look at next, as well as the peak loads that occur during leash falls and or dynamic events, is the current tension or predicted peak load higher than the working load limit of the materials you are using? It's obvious in the bottom picture that it is. The carabiner is open. Moving on to small angles. Consider again the angles in your anchor. Remember that anything above 120 degrees, as seen on this graph here, you are exponentially loading those anchor points or legs of your anchor to higher than the actual line load. So taking that into account, are you now above the working load limit of your materials inside your anchor? Consider again the peak loads during a leash fall. Are those higher than your working load limit given the large angles? Finally, extension. Consider a failure of your main anchor rope and or sling. Will the master point extend out if any failure were to occur in the system? This is something to protect against, because that could lead to failures of the other anchor points, which is far from ideal. As we can see here, there's a lot to consider, and that was just the anchor rope and or slings. The other 5 components that are basic components of a Highline need these drastic and thorough and exhaustive checks as well to make sure that we have a properly and safe rigged Highline. Keep in mind, some of the stuff that I just went over can be difficult to tell if you're in the field, if you didn't rig the line or maybe it wasn't your gear. If you ever have a question, don't assume that because someone else rigged it or whoever rigged it did it in a safe way. Always ask a question. Tell someone, take a picture, show the guy who rigged it. But never ever assume that something that you don't understand or is questionable to you is safe. Do not do that. You are putting your life on this line. Check it before you trust it. And that's basically all I have. Questions?
Would you recommend a rope backup or webbing backup?
I prefer webbing backups. I like the feel of a double line, and I hate when the rope wraps around the main line and you walk on it. It's the worst feeling in the world. For safety, also webbing. Again, considering the twisting of the backup around the main, there's really fine points of abrasion between a rope and a webbing that's not there with webbing on webbing. There's a wider surface area in contact with the main line and the backup when they have an interaction with each other.
Don't you think that the rope is more prepared for abrasion of the webbing?
Sure, yeah. So optimally, you will rig your lines such that your main and backup line are completely in space, not touching anything but feet and leash rings, and hands sometimes. But in the case that you can't avoid some sort of abrasion point in your rig, then sure, a rope is better for that.
Or maybe you say that because you want to set the double of the webbing.
Yeah, fair enough, but I also sell rope. So before I hand over the mic to whoever is next, I'm putting together a document that's going to have all these checks that I just went through, plus many more. Actually, yeah, so before I talk about that, I want to say that what I've presented here today is not comprehensive by any means. Please do your own research, practice your rigging in a safe environment, and check your highlines before you tie into them. As I was saying, I'm putting together all these checks for all the 6 basic components, and I'm hoping to release that soon with full descriptions and pictures for every check, and it should be a great reference document.